Hey, writers and readers, I'm Adrian Buskey, and you're listening to Fictitious, a podcast about the storytelling craft of science fiction and fantasy. Joining me today is Shaun Barger, author of Mage Against the Machine. Beyond having a title that's so clever we're all mad we didn't think of it, Mage Against the Machine is an explosive and emotional collision between fantasy and science fiction. It intertwines the stories of a young Magi soldier from an isolated world of government-controlled magic and a cybernetically enhanced resistance fighter struggling against a planet-conquering artificial intelligence. Mage Against the Machine is available now from Saga Press. Shaun, welcome to Fictitious.
Hey, Adrian, thank you for having me.
So I always try to give like the little description of what a story is to begin with. And obviously there are blurbs and things people see on the back of a book or find on the website or whatever. What I always like to hear is the author describe the story. I want you to take those 500 pages and pithily give me the 120-word description in your own words, Shaun.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Well, the log line we've been using is Harry Potter meets Terminator, even though that's really just like shorthand for this book is about contemporary urban fantasy wizards and a robot apocalypse. So I guess kind of a longer answer, more accurate description of just like the core of what this is about is, it takes place 100 years in the future. And the Magi, or wizards, they all live in a network of these pocket bubble dimensions hidden from the human world, just all across the globe. And they think that all the humans are dead. They think they've been dead for a century. They think everything beyond their veils or bubbles is just totally screwed, just totally desolate, destroyed. If they go out there, they'll just die. But there's this one mage, Nikolai, one of the main characters. He's a soldier, and he's part of the order charged with maintaining the veils between his world and ours. And he is just obsessed with human culture, the music, the stories, movies, art. So when he discovers that not only are the humans alive beyond the veil, but they're also experiencing like a full species genocide under the tyranny of this ultra advanced AI, he's just pretty determined to find a way to alert the mage populace about what's going on and help humanity no matter what. And so we see his story played out equally against this other story of a woman named Gemma Burton, who is this augmented kind of cyborg human who's a ballerina turned soldier, and she's a runner for the human resistance. And so we just kind of see the shit hit the fan constantly as their stories play out against each other until they finally meet somewhere around the middle. But yeah, that's kind of the core of what the book's about.
One of the things I really thought was interesting was this concept of the Magi group who, like you said, they live in these veils. They're completely separated. They think humans are gone, and they don't really see themselves as humans. They know that they're genetically like 98% similar, but they are, magically inclined, and they have this completely different kind of society because of it. And what I thought was interesting is that they essentially kind of mythologize humans. For them, they're this extinct race that made beautiful music and literature and movies and stuff that the mages just aren't quite as good at doing. Like they have magic, so wow, they can do magic, but they're not good at the art in quite in the same way. And so having them sort of like nostalgic for what humanity was in the past, I thought was a really kind of fascinating touch. That idea of like, because normally we see it the other way around, it's portal fantasies usually have that idea of like the human entering the magic world. And this one goes kind of the opposite direction, which I thought was pretty cool. In a lot of ways, for almost like 250 pages, this feels like two separate novels operating in parallel and then kind of like crashing together in the middle as those two stories between Gem and Nikolai intertwine. As we dive into that, the first thing I kind of want to know is like, where did the original idea come from? Because it's pretty complex, but it also has this amazingly pithy, powerful title. Like, what came first? The title, the story? Like, how did that come together?
The story, actually, my kid sister came up with the title. She was really feverish and sick at this house party. Me and a group of friends had moved to LA back in 2010. And I'd been working on the book for like about 6 months. And I just had the working title as I was just calling it like the Fuck Yeah Wizard Chronicles, like as a joke. And she was just like being a really good sport. She was in her room and she just comes out, just all feverish from a dream. And she just shouts the title across the courtyard that was just full of drunk. She's just like, Mage Against the Machine. And I was like, what? And she's like, Mage Against the Machine. And I'm like, yeah, there it is. Boom. So, I have to give that credit to my kid sister, Caitlin Barger, who's also a super talented writer. Yeah. So that's where that came from. The story itself, the idea I love urban fantasy. I've always loved urban fantasy. I've always loved science fantasy in all its forms. You know, you see in things like Harry Potter, of course, but almost all urban fantasy, you have something that's like kind of like White Wolf's. Is it called the Masquerade, where, you know, you have the wizards and you have the vampires and you have all that stuff hidden away from just an otherwise normal looking human world. And of course, you have to do that because if you had magic present and you had all that stuff present, then history would be totally different. The world would look totally different. Nothing would look like the familiar world we know. And a lot of the draw of modern contemporary fantasy is you get a little column A and a little column B. But I just remember when I read the first Harry Potter book as a kid, there's this part that really stuck out to me that made me really angry when I was like just a little high schooler. Harry is with Hagrid. He's going to Diagon Alley for the very first time. And he asks Hagrid, he's like, why are the wizards hidden? Why are they hiding? And Hagrid's just kind of hand waves it. And he's just like, well, if the humans knew about wizards, they just want us to solve all their problems. And then the story just kind of moves on. And I get that. They're just lampshading it. You know, like we said, there's a reason that you do this in these kind of stories.
Right.
But I was just like, okay, I mean, they could cure AIDS and cancer. They could basically like give us unlimited free energy. They could solve all our problems and create like, you know, make space travel like just totally viable, just basically make the world amazing. But I guess you don't want to deal with it. And I thought that was so super shitty. So I kind of have always just wanted to explore the idea of the long-term repercussions of this kind of magical isolationism and just like what would really happen if you had wizards who just totally like separated themselves from the world and then just kind of got stuck. They don't culturally evolve past the, you know, now basically. They're basically just are. And that was also kind of my way to make it so the main wizard talks like a millennial, you know, and like, you know, like, so like he likes all the movies and the music up to 2020. So he's basically imbibed all the stuff that we've grown up on. And yeah, so that was kind of like, okay, so say we jump forward 100 years, what would it look like for a wizard to then leave the bubble? It's kind of the opposite of Portal Fantasy. It's, you know, someone from that world coming into our world. Yeah, I just thought it'd be fun if it was a robot apocalypse, and I thought it could be really interesting. And so I had fun with it.
I like that you use the word fun, because I think something that struck me as I was getting into this is that I had read a few blurbs from people like online and, you know, some of the marketing things and stuff. You know, it made Mage Against the Machine sound like this silly fun romp. And I was like, this is a serious novel. This is like an emotionally complex, often I would say emotionally difficult book. The stuff is heavy. I mean, with Nikolai in the Vale in the mage world, if you strip away all of the magic and stuff on top of it, he's going through the same crap that we all dealt with at like 20, right? Like he's got the love of his teenage life who's rejected them and gone to like his rival, essentially the girlfriend sort of that like doesn't quite like work and doesn't play by the rules. She's totally 500 days of summering him. And so he's got magical power and he's and a lot of baggage, lots and lots of baggage.
A lot of baggage. Yeah.
But at the core, he just kind of wants to be happy and hang out with his old friends from his hometown while he manages to really F those things up in a huge way.
Oh, yeah.
But otherwise, I mean, the Magi Society feels kind of idyllic. You know, they've really kind of crystallized, like you said, into this sort of idealized version of what it was like to hang out like at the end of the 21st century or whatever. And they're just, you know, sort of chilling and enjoying their cool magic. Meanwhile, the human world blows.
It's pretty rough out there.
Yeah. And so you have Gemma, who is hyper competent. You know, she's got these mods that make her smart and super effective in combat and just a little bit ahead of everybody else, but is dealing with a world where these giant AIs have just taken over and just basically crushed most of humanity's hope for the future. And that's nihilistic bleakness in an enormous way. And there's a lot of characters walking around with a pretty blasé nihilism with it. How do you balance that kind of tone to make a adventure story move forward and offer some kind of optimism while there is such bleak overtones happening?
I've always really liked vulnerable, like action heroes. Like I love action stories, but I love old movies like, you know, Die Hard, where the guy's getting his feet cut up. He's getting just totally destroyed throughout the movie. And I like action and stories that have real weight and consequence to them. So I was having fun, but I wanted to have that kind of just the weight of some weight of reality to it. Kind of going back to Harry Potter, we look at his story. He like has no love in his childhood. He has the most traumatic, abusive, horrible childhood. He lives under a staircase. He is just tortured, basically. And we don't really see the repercussions for that. And I think that's good, actually, because I think it's more empowering for kids to read about someone going through this kind of stuff and really rising above it in a really fun, exciting, beautiful way. But with this, I was like, I kind of want to see a more fucked up wizard, a more like messed up dude who is dealing with what it would look like. And also the fact that he is this extreme badass, wizard soldier badass. I was like, okay, so realistically, why would he be that way? And what would be like the repercussions of that? And I also kind of wanted to play with the fact that the wizards are a very easy metaphor for privileged classes. They live in a literal magic privilege bubble. And so because he is, even if he's miserable and an outsider and an outcast among his people, he is still a wizard in an amazing society. And his problems are mostly internal. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we have Jem on the outside who's dealing with some real grown-up shit. And she is dealing, like, you know, her issue, her big emotional arc is just how hardened she's become. She literally can't even cry. And I think it was uncomfortable for a lot of readers, too. Nick's arc it's a lot of interpersonal stuff. It's a lot of just him dealing with his trauma. It's, you know, this guy you see crying a lot. And then you see, you know, go back to Jem, who's just kind of like dealing with just everything, like an action hero, like a kind of more classically, you know, almost like more classically, like you'd see a classically male version of like with her story, right, and kind of a more classically feminine story with his. And so I kind of flipped those because, you know, I don't think you see it often. And I also think that just if you are a privileged person, you have the privilege of really working on yourself in a way that people who are not do not have that opportunity to. He can deal with his emotional stuff because he's a wizard. And she's like, well, I'm, you know, fighting for literal survival every day. And I think that kind of it's a bit close to reality in some ways. So, I mean, that was kind of the core of it. And I do think there is a lot of fun with the robots and the world. And I do think there is a lot of humor in this book, but the core of it was reflected on reality.
Like having those two very different perspectives, that's a challenging theme to tackle, that idea of comfortable privilege, but the angst that sits underneath it versus like the type of humanity where everything blows. So like you rise above that to a certain degree. And, you know, we see that all the time with just people like that. We sort of adjust to our situation. And when things are really, really bad, we can still find humor. When things are still really, really good, we can still find ways to make it suck. And seeing that, like, that kind of play out in those two different ways is really interesting. There's a point about 200 pages into the book when Nikolai has a full-blown meltdown, and you see it coming. You know it's coming. And at 41, I could watch it and be like, me at 20 did something similar to this. I mean, I didn't, you know, almost melt some people in a bar or whatever because I don't have magical powers, but I was like cringing as I got into it because I was like, oh no, I don't want to relive this. This is a little too close to the bone. I mean, do you find as like when readers, you know, have reactions to that, do they embrace those moments of like, oh, I get that? Or are they like, oh God, that's too close to reality for me, you know, in my fantasy?
I think you get both. A lot of the more negative reviews, or more critical, I think is a better way to put it, is a lot of people really struggled with Nikolai as a character. And a lot of people really loved him, but I think it is that split. Like, it's hard to look at like the ugliest things that we go through, the ugliest parts of ourselves. And like Nikolai is just such a toxic white boy, dealing with so much toxic white boy shit. Even writing it is really, really uncomfortable, but I think it's something that's important to talk about. I think a lot of young men in America deal with this kind of stuff all the time. Like, so in real life, you know, most people obviously haven't tried to melt the faces off of a bunch of bullies in a bar, but I think a lot of people have gotten too drunk and gotten in a shouting match with their ex and then made a total fool of themselves in front of a bunch of people, feeling totally justified in the heat of the moment. And then afterwards being like, just feeling like my life's over. I've made such a fool of myself. My social credit is completely shot. What do I do now? Like, I think that Nikolai's experience is pretty universal for a lot of people. And fantasy is always a really fun way to explore this stuff because you can make it a little more colorful and a little more exciting in the form of a wizard battle in a bar.
I've seen it said before that part of the fun of fantasy stories and fiction like this is that if you take a young person who already feels like the weight of the world is on their shoulders, right? Like almost every teenager, unless they really have things going well for them, feels like they're carrying it all because that's what their perspective shows them. They, you know, they've got a limited view of the world and it's very, very heavy on them. When you take something like a Harry Potter literally has the weight of the world on his shoulders because he's this chosen one character. And that's a lot to put on a kid like going through high school or whatever. You know, when he gets angsty in book 5, I can justify that. I mean, I could see being pretty pissed off in those moments, you know. I think what you see with Nikolai in this is that he is a guy who's carrying a huge secret, you know, that discovers like right towards the beginning of the novel. He's carrying a childhood of abuse from a mother who was apparently trying to prepare him for something, but doing it in a way that was ruthless and incredibly damaging to him as a person. Mm-hmm. But the stuff that he's getting himself into as a 20-year-old is the pretty mundane, stupid crap that we can all look at and go, oh, come on, Nikolai. You can fly, my dude, right? Like you've got all these fancy powers, and yet you just can't handle a pretty boy like, you know, who's managed to grab your ex-girlfriend. So it's difficult and challenging, and at the same time feels very real. And I think that grounds the story while there's some pretty big things going on. So let's get into the world building process then, because like I said, there's almost like 2 novels going on at once for a long time in this book. And there's a lot of complicated backstory to deliver. And I thought it was interesting that like you were very piecemealing out the world building and exposition and stuff as we went along, because it was important for us to learn it. But there's also, you know, nobody likes an info dump, right? Like, you know, you can't handle that. So you had to be like really careful about how you pace that out. So what was your methodology for that? And how hard was it to fine tune how you were delivering all of that world information?
It was tough. I wrote most of the Nikolai's arc stuff first. Jem's POV chapters actually came like very late in the rewrites. Like I had sent the book out in its entirety without any of the Jem POV chapters. And there were a couple that were actually from Nick's, and we didn't sell it. And I was like, and we had from Nava Wolf at Saga Press. She was just like, I dig this, but it needs something else. And so I took it, and then I was just like, okay, well, we need to have Jem as just as main, you know, she's just as important of a character as Nikolai. And I really think she's also the moral center of the book. Like she's most people's favorite character who read the novel. So, the process was I focused on the mage world for a long time first, until Nikolai literally gets outside of it and has that kind of adventure through the woods on his way to Base Machado. And I worked on this book over a very long period of time. Like I started in 2012, and I finished the first version, which was very, 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 very different from what's out there today. It was like 500 pages, 300 pages, which were cut entirely, 200, which you see in bits and pieces here and there. We saw like months before he actually went to New Damascus and learned to be an edge guard. We saw his entirety of a boot camp. And like he was like, we saw like a whole year before he even goes back to Marblewood. And so like I had all that built out over like several versions of this book. And so the mage stuff like was really built in detail first. What are the two terms? It's like pantser and gardeners, or, you know, the outliners and the non-outliners. It was like just a real heavy mix of the two, of me having an outline and then trying to kind of write to that outline and that setting that I built, and then discovering what worked and what didn't as I went, and just throwing everything away. There's more to this book that I've thrown away than there is in the pages. And so it was just kind of a lot of manic sculpting and revision and just trying to hide the seams and figure out what makes sense. And I mean, there were a lot of times I would write in something in the setting and then realize later on this breaks the world. So just a lot of simplifying and fat trimming. And like, I'm sure there's still a few things here and there that like, if I thought too hard about it, would break it. But it was just a lot of slow work, just trying to make these two worlds fit together in a way that makes sense. And I'm pretty pleased with the result. So, I mean, I think it paid off. But yeah, it was a lot of work. It was just a lot of work. It was slow, it was careful, and that's it. Nothing, you know, no easy tricks or shortcuts, unfortunately.
Well, there's like 3 different things I want to extrapolate off of from there. So, I mean, right off, like one of the last things you said there was that you kept finding that there were problems that could break. What I would take is like kind of the internal logic of the story. I mean, fantasy is very, very hard because it's full of MacGuffins. Finding that way to make sure that the rules stay consistent and, you know, and don't completely like mangle the story at some point can be difficult. Science fiction is difficult because like the more elaborate you make it, the more you can write yourself into corners where things don't make sense. And you have both in this. So do you have any examples of where things broke or how you managed to fix some of those issues?
I mean, I have to think about that. I can't really off the top of my head, but I mean, the best thing I find to do in this situation is just not to show too much, not to paint yourself into a corner. Like, I do very much the thing where you have a flashlight in an immense cavern. I'm showing exactly like what you need to see to understand the situation you're in, and all the other stuff I just keep in outlines and I use if it works, and I cut if it doesn't. But it's just mostly kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back type thing. A better example would be things I figured out that made it more interesting, like later on. Like, I didn't have the revolver as a sentient artifact until like very late stages, like one of the final drafts of it. And then I was like, oh, this is way more interesting. And I completely rehauled the book around that. Like, there's just a lot of stuff like that. I mean, in the original version, there were 2 kinds of magic. There was sharp weaves and non-sharp weaves. And civilians couldn't use any magic that could actually directly affect someone. Like, there was almost like an AT field from Evangelion kind of thing going, where like with wizards, you couldn't actually cast magic on them. Just like a lot of different stuff. The main systems I drew from to build was I kind of had a lot of Wheel of Time. I always really liked the weaving and the threads because I think that it kind of made sense in a semi-scientific way. Like, it really felt like you were weaving the webs of reality. Harry Potter kind of trigger command magic is always really fun. And I mean, we have the focals instead of wands, and I played with those a lot too. Like, those weren't originally something that were artifacts too. And now they're almost like kind of daemons in their own way. They're a reflection of the user's personality, daemons from like the Golden Compass. I don't know. I didn't. It's kind of hard to think because I've been working on this for so long, and I turned in the final draft like a couple of years ago, so it's been a while. But yeah, it's a big, messy. It was a nightmare, and I'm glad I've done the foundational process of creating this world, and I can just kind of now have fun with it and play within this playground I've created for myself and for my readers.
Well, I always think when you have that much additional world building that never sees the light of day, then you have if somebody wants to option this, I have a whole bunch of extra stuff if they, will make a long running TV series, or if somebody wants to make a role playing game out of it, then you've got half of the RPG stuff ready to go. So keeping those things in your pocket just in case, it doesn't have to be like completely lost to Apocrypha,
Yeah, absolutely.
You did mention though, like that Gemma was this late stage edition. And that's something that I kind of wondered about, not because of the flow of the novel, because the novel doesn't feel like that at all. It feels very much like it's intended. But a lot of the marketing copy focuses very much on Nikolai. And then Gemma gets kind of mentioned a few like short paragraphs down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I see this happen a lot, and I get it because it's, you're trying to market a book and you're trying to get people on board for something. You can't overwhelm them with too much story. And so a lot of times I see that like sort of POV characters kind of get lost in the marketing copy. And I had kind of like skimmed the stuff initially, but I was aware of Nikolai. But then when it made the switch to Gemma, I was like, oh, this feels pretty major, but I really kind of wasn't expecting it. I don't know why I just completely missed her when I'd read the descriptions of stuff. And like you said, like she's my favorite character from the book. So I was like, oh, great. I'm really excited for her to be here. When you have to overhaul that much, I mean, was it kind of like a light bulb moment when you were like, oh, having this other character introduces so many new opportunities for me? Or was it oh, crap, I've got another 50,000 words to write to reimagine this? Like, how did you approach that?
I mean, it was mostly very exciting. She was in the book, like in her story isn't different. We just see all the stuff before, and then we see a lot more after we meet her from her point of view. And I just reworked a lot and created a lot of new material for it. But like the big thing was, like originally you didn't see the human world until literally Nikolai went out there. It was kind of like a reveal, like, oh, wow, we're going to see what's out there. What's it going to be? But I realized I'm like, the concept of the novel is literally it's a wizard going into a robot apocalypse. It was kind of whack to just like wait till the middle of the book and pretend it's this reveal when it's like the core concept of the book. On a meta level, the readers know what's going to happen to some extent when they go out there. So I was doing a disservice to the readers and the story itself by not really giving us a reason to care about the world and the people in it. It worked so much better. And I mean, just Jem's such a good character, and I think she's, she is a much stronger character as a person in ways than Nikolai. And I think it just worked so much better. Like writing it was easy. Like her chapters are honestly probably my favorite, especially I think the Mark of Torment's probably my favorite chapter in the whole book. It was easy. It was like, as soon as I went into it, it was such an aha moment. Like I busted those out in like 4 months, like all of her chapters, and they just flowed. And it was, and then when Nava read it, she's like, "You did it! All right, this is it. We're gonna buy this book. We love it." And I was like, "Thank God, that was a lot of work."
You made it count. So, like you said, there's a certain level of meta thinking that always comes in, unless a reader comes in completely flying blind. There is a certain awareness they have of the story, and particularly if you are an experienced reader who's read a lot of stories. I mean, I think you can't help but start looking for the twists and turns, right? Like you kind of start seeing where things are going. And something that struck me, and I was even talking with my wife about this last night, where I was like, there were moments where emotional beats where I could be like, okay, I know where Nikolai's going here because I've screwed up like this. So I know how this is going to hurt. But lots of times where I felt like the story verges on like giving almost like what would the audience wish for? Oh, here it is. And I'm going to make that hurt really, really bad for you. Like, there's definitely some twist of the knife moments. And that felt a little sadistic, Shaun. I got to be honest. It hurt a little bit. When you approach those kinds of things, I mean, clearly you have to make it hurt because that's how a story turns and evolves and story and characters grow. Like, how do you balance those moments with having some snappy dialogue and some fun while at the same time knowing you're going to punch people in the gut a little bit?
It's a really tough balance to strike. It's, there's kind of a push-pull dynamic. Like you said, nobody's going to go into a book, especially for a debut author, I can't rely on twists and tricks and all that stuff. So I just have to kind of try to do the most interesting version of what the story is. And I think just having the real weight of truth behind like what it would be like to explore these to re-examine these very familiar tropes. Because like, let's be real, this book is full of a lot of very common normal tropes that we're all really familiar with. And my big kind of goal with this too was to just re-examine them and just do new things with them. And unfortunately, a lot of the most interesting things you can do is they turn out to be very painful. And, a lot of this book is just both Jem and Nikolai's rock bottoms and lows. Like, just everything is coming to an end. Everything's falling apart before we can get to this place of real change. And I mean, that's just kind of true to life, I think. But it's not really like, I don't really like to approach something with like, thinking like, oh, how am I going to really like surprise emotionally or really hurt the audience? I just kind of was just writing what felt natural, like, what would be the just natural consequences of certain things. And so Nikolai gets his ass kicked a lot and a lot of terrible things happen to Jem, but, you try to make it not too bleak. It's tough. Like, have you ever seen the movie? This feels kind of random, but I'm really interested in like tyranny narratives because we, to an extent, we're experiencing tyranny in a lot of ways now, right? Especially, less privileged people. And I think you see a lot of tyranny narratives that are just this brutal, miserable grind, just horrible thing happening to good people. And I was watching this movie a little while back, and have you ever seen? I think it's A Little Princess. It's by Alfonso Cuarón. I think he directed it. It always felt like kind of a sibling piece to Secret Garden, and they both were remade into newer movies. And this movie is about this rich little girl whose dad is like this British officer, and he's off at war. I think it's in World War II. It might be World War I. I'm not sure. And I think it is World War II. And the dad, he dies. And while she's at this kind of academy for rich girls. And so this girl no longer has money. She no longer has connections. So she's made into a servant at this like school for girls. And the headmistress is a monster, just like a real Nurse Ratched type. Like if you watch that movie, every single scene is literally something horrible happening to this girl or someone trying to destroy something about this girl. And her just finding some way to spin it into something beautiful and finding a way to overcome it. And when you're writing about tyranny and about horrible things happen, it is just so easy to fall into just the nihilistic cynicism of it. And that's something that Jem is really dealing with. Like, she is a hardcore atheist when it begins. She doesn't believe anything means anything. She is just slowly losing more and more hope until, she pretty much gives up. And Nikolai's the same. Like, it's the first act is just them both slowly giving up. It really can be not very fun to read or write about. And I don't know. So it's a difficult balance to strike, but it is, I think humor is really important and just finding moments of joy. And like, you see so much just grim, dark fiction that's just brutal with maybe the one funny character. And in real life, everyone's funny. Everyone's always joking with their friends. They're just laughing all the time, especially people who are just in horrible situations, like people who are enduring under tyranny. Like, laughter is what gets you through it. It's gallows humor for a reason. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't quite have an answer for it, but that's kind of my rambling tangent.
I really like hearing that thinking on something like that because, I mean, especially in a time period where we have as much as we've ever had, you know, there's bountiful wealth in the world and so many resources. And at the same time, there's so much awful stuff going on and so many people are stepped on constantly. And there is such an imbalance in our culture. You know, one of the jobs of fiction is to examine the human condition and to look at those things and say, oh, you know, there are bright spots in the awfulness, and we have to make those, you know. I mean, everybody has they have their own version of normal, and when normal changes, you get a new normal and you adjust to it, and you again try to find some level of happiness or some way to get through it, or otherwise what's the point of being here, right? And yeah, so like you said, the gallows humor and stuff, I think like all of that stuff, it's like if we've proved anything as the human race is that we will endure awful crap and make a crass joke about it in order to just survive and try to find the bright spot. And in fiction, then we get that escalation of, like you said, like the little girl in that film, like spinning the awful into something good and trying to figure out. And I think that's a hopeful idea, that idea of being able to, like, whatever life throws at me, I can convert it into something better. You know, it's the lemons into lemonade kind of cliche, but like turned into something magical and hopefully uplifting, hopefully the kind of thing that you can walk away from and go, well, that put me through some things, but I'm more powerful because of it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the joy of great fiction, is that it teaches us that lesson over and over again. I mean, if in anything, I mean, maybe that's why we turn to it so often, is because it's like we have to be reinforced in a certain way. We have to say, okay, whatever the difficulty that faces me, whether it's an enormous task or something rather small and mundane, it's still my own Sisyphean task to push up the hill. And encountering something like this gives me a little bit more power, gives me that moment to realize I'm the hero of my own story, and I too can push through.
Absolutely. It's like emotionally very useful to see characters that you get very attached to and you see a lot of yourself in go through the worst shit possible and overcome it. Like, it adds, you know, a little more hope to your own life. Makes your problems seem a little smaller or more just, you know, surmountable. So yeah, I believe in that too.
Let's talk a little bit about like the real direct craft of things. You mentioned that you're kind of in between sort of a pantser and a plotter, you know, and you went through a lot of revisions on this thing. So what would you actually describe your outlining process, or like how your writing works? And then I want to know what you do it in, like, you know, what kind of software do you use, paper? Like what are your tools of the trade?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my main four things are, main three things, I guess, is Word, Microsoft Word. I've always used it since, you know, forever. And I jump between, my computer, and it's great I have it on my iPhone too. And you can literally just, when you save to the OneDrive, you're just like jumping back and forth. And it's super useful for, you know, I like to do a lot of edits on my phone. I like to write at my computer because you just can't get into that hyper focus otherwise if you're not like, you know. Before I do a scene, I have I do a lot of outlining in Simple Note and also on paper. And sometimes I'll write it on paper and I'll copy it into Simple Note and then copy it into the actual chapter I'm working on, and I'll just have all my notes laid out. I like to have like a lot of snippets of dialogue that serve as kind of little scene kernels. And then I'll just kind of just jump back and forth within a chapter and just kind of pick away like I'm sculpting. My favorite part of writing is always revisions. Like, I think I'm maybe not that common in that regard. I know most people hate revisions, but for me, the first draft is just, it's bleeding stone every time. It's brutal. Like, I think most writers, like, they hate writing. They love having written something, like, and that's how I feel. When something's done, it's the best feeling in the world, even when it's messy, because, you know, once the foundation's there, it's just, you know, cutting and pasting and like, you know, just tweaking. And that part is just really fun and doesn't require the kind of mental hyper focus and like getting in the zone that I think creating initial prose does. So you know, I do outline pretty heavily, but I am then constantly changing and throwing things away. Like, I do think it's important for me to have an ending I'm working towards and have like an overall like idea of what the main arcs are going to be, you know, just what the structure of the story is going to be, and just what the main kind of emotional like things I'm dealing with are in the story, and also just what's interesting to me at the time. And then I just, as I am actually doing the work of writing it, that's when I usually really figure out what I want to do. And so, yeah, I'm just constantly jumping back between outlining, creating prose, re-outlining, messing with the prose, like, and then just kind of, yeah, just doing the frantic sculptor thing. So, yeah, that's kind of my process.
Now, you mentioned that you do some of that on your phone and stuff too. So do you work mostly out of a home office? Or are you like the guy sitting at the coffee shop, or a mix of the two?
My favorite thing used to be just, I was at E-Entertainment for like 5.5 years. And so I was just, the whole office would leave and I'd have my own cubicle with like the screen set up and the ergonomic chair. And I was there for 5.5 years. And that's why I wrote most of this book after work, not while I was working, on my lunch break. Wink. Never on the clock. No, sir.
Never.
Who would do such a thing? No, not me. Same. Before that, I worked as a library supervisor at Dominican University up north for 5 years before that. And that was honestly, writing at another job that has a lot of downtime is like, that's the best for me. But, I got laid off from entertainment like a few months before I actually sold this book. And I'm working part-time right now. I've just done like some side gigs while I'm trying to like getting the whole like full-time author thing off the ground. Yeah, so right now I work from home a lot, just like at my home little office desk, like literally right now where we're speaking. This is my main writing zone. I do a lot of my edits just like lying on the couch, in front of the TV, like YouTube playing music and stuff, or Spotify and visualizers. I do a lot of writing and editing on the metro as I'm going around the city, off the app. So just kind of wherever. Like when I do go to cafes, it's great, but I'm lazy and easily distracted. So I just kind of like need to have my space that when I'm sitting and I'm there, my brain's like, oh God, it's time to work. Okay. I find if I do go to a cafe, I will get stuff done, but like the 3 hours that I'm there, like maybe 40 minutes of that's actually like writing and not me being like, I need another scone. I need another coffee. This is delicious. Better do some more research. Oh, I got some text, just the general. I got a lot more writing done before I had a phone, I tell you. But it's, you make it work. You do what you can.
I think it's a strange time to be a writer type because there are more opportunities for writers, maybe less money than ever in it, but but more ways to distract ourselves than ever. More ways to just to have, like you said, like the phone just is a endless font of not getting a damn thing done. And, and a world that so desperately wants us to give our attention to everything we don't need at all. Ever. So I think anytime anybody can get a book done, just getting a first draft done with all of those things floating around when the internet exists and video game systems are in the other room and there are people tweeting at you or texting you or whatever crap all the time. Like I'm a fractured person that works crazy on deadlines. I'm super intense in short bursts and then really ADHD outside of those bursts. So I'm always impressed that anybody can get something done over a long haul. When you talked about doing that over years, I'm like, oh my God, that's my nightmare.
Yeah, no, it's hell. Like my little brother, he's 13 years old now. Like last year, he's just like, I think I want to be an author when I grow up. And I was like, no, don't do it. You don't want to do that. It's no, I got it. I did it. It's cool, but find something else. It's fine, man. Yeah, man. One thing for having the video game system in the other room that helps is I'm an Xbox, what do you call it? The user, I'm friends with my agent on there. So when I'm online, it'll pop up and it'll be like, Shaun's playing, Red Dead Redemption or whatever. I guess that's on the PS4. So, that keeps me honest. I'm like, okay, he knows. Like he sees when I'm playing video games. If he's on there and I pop up, he'll literally get a notification. Your friend, Shaun Barger, is online playing games when he should write. What a piece of shit. So
yeah, that would keep a person honest. I always look at the authors who are also prolific tweeters, like a Wendig or Sam Sykes or Delilah Dawson. Oh my God. And I'm like, how do you guys manage to put so much quality social media content out and be that funny and creative and still get something done? It's mind blowing. I bow to their superpowers.
Oh my God. They have some form of mania that I'm very envious of because it's the things that disguise themselves as work that are the real distractions. Like, it used to be falling into a research hole. I mean, we've all fallen into the TV trope spiral is real.
Oh my God, I love that website so much. Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. And it'll make you feel like a real hack too, which is necessary. We need reminders that, like, we didn't create this idea. You're like, here's all the thousands of other people who've done it probably better than you. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm humbled once more. Thank you, universe. But, you know, it used to be like, well, what's the old joke? Like, you know, just when you have writing to get done, your apartment is so clean. Like, my desk is spotless. There is not a speck of dust in this entire place. And then I'm like, you know, because it's like, how can I work in these conditions, you know? And now there's just so many things that look like that. Like, Twitter and social media is something that as writers, as authors, we have to be on. Like, we're talking to other authors constantly, which is great and work. And we're reaching out to fans, which is great and is work. And we're doing all these other things that also tickle that part of our brain that, you know, gives us the warm fuzzies when we accomplish writing, because a well-worded tweet is quite satisfying to put out into the world. Ooh, and if you get some likes in there too, you're like, yeah, I've done my work for the day. I got some writing read by some people who dug it, man. Done for the day. I'll write tomorrow, whatever, you know? So, I mean, kudos to, like, just all those authors who managed to find the balance of tweeting a lot and getting a lot of writing done, because it certainly ain't me. I cannot do that.
I imagine that there's got to be, like you said, there's that endorphin payoff of making those things work. But yeah, you've got to shut the internet, like it's the Chuck Wendig going off to the shack and being alone with no internet for a while, which sounds blissful in a lot of ways. But at the same time, like, but how would I back up to Dropbox if I have no internet? And then you spiral out, and then our dependence on the technology is a total mess.
It is.
As we wrap up, I just want to know, what other stories are you feeding your brain? Stories or research, or what other media is going in there right now? Like, what are you playing? What are you reading? What are you watching?
I'm reading Murakami's Killing Commendator. Yeah, Killing Commendator right now. And it's so good. He's just a master of magical realism. Like, it's so good. I just finished John Fowles' The Magus, which is possibly the best thing I've ever read. Like, it's an absolute masterpiece. It is the product of someone who obsessed over it to a very probably like not mentally well state. Like, he worked on that book his whole life, and it shows. And like, you know, I'm let's see, what am I playing? I'm playing a lot of games right now. I was working on Red Dead 2, which is, Jesus, that is an ocean of just high quality good stuff, and also a dangerous distraction. I'm playing Kingdom Hearts 3 right now. That is a quintessential guilty pleasure, because it is nonsense, and I love it so much, even though it's so Kingdom Hearts. You know, I'm always picking away at different. I'm like playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night right now. I'm finally playing Super Metroid, which I never played, even though I played Fusion and Prime. I mean, I don't know. There's just there's so much entertainment out there. Let's see. I'm watching The Dragon Prince, that new show by, I think, one of the head writers from Avatar and Korra. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I was saying that my book was the main magic systems was Harry Potter, Wheel of Time, and Korra / Airbender. Oh, because that is just some of the best magical action. So that is especially, I wanted my fights to look very much like Korra.
There was a moment when Gemma and Nikolai meet, and she watches him perform his magic for the first time, and she has this highly analytical, enhanced brain, and she starts making notes of how his movements work and how he's flowing with energy and chakras and stuff like that. And I was like, that's airbending right there. I see that.
Yep. That's like airbending. Yeah. I just, oh man, there's just so much good stuff out there right now. I just started killing Eve.
Oh God, it's so good.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. And I'm about to jump into Russian Doll, which I hear is insane.
So good. You're gonna
I'm
love
watching
it.
some of Kingdom, that Korean period zombie drama. Beautiful show. Really cool. God, I don't know. I'm really excited for Charlie Jane Anders' next book. She is probably, I mean, I hate saying my favorite of anything, but there's one story that she wrote that I still reread every year. The 6 months, 3 days, I think it's called. Have you ever read that?
I haven't. I have her on my list, and I'm hoping to get on this show soon.
Oh, you're in for a treat, man. It's so good.
I saw her speak at a little event here in St. Louis one time that both had her and Annalee Newitz on it. And Annalee, I've been on panels with before, and she's fantastic. But I was just so taken with Charlie's mind and the way she spoke and what she talked about. It's so hard, doing what I do. I'm reading on a schedule schedule and reading, like, basically I don't read for pleasure anymore. I read for like the next interview. And so it's always that kind of like, oh, if I want to read that book, I have to get on the show because that's the only way I'm going to have time to do that. So, but yeah, I need to get caught up on her stuff.
Well, All the Birds in the Sky, her last book, which is so good, really was definitely something that like has been floating in my mind a lot because it's hard to find science fantasy. And that book is literally about the relationship between a witch and a mad scientist and just how their lives kind of play out. And they have kind of this relationship, friendship, romance kind of across their lifetimes. And it's just masterful. It's so good. So yeah, check that book out. You're going to really enjoy it. And I'm very, very excited. I think the new book, I forget what it's called, but her new book that came out like I think last week or the week before, I think it's literally the reason she left IO9, like to fully focus on this book. I mean, there's so much. We're at this place where there is infinite high quality entertainment now. It can be daunting, but it's just so inspirational. Like, it's a good time to be an artist. I mean, times of tyranny and hardship and just like all that is always when the best art is created. So life sucks for a lot of people right now. But goddamn, the art is good. So,
And that is a great pull quote to wrap this up on. Shaun, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Can you tell the audience where they should be following you, where they should be keeping up so that like as your next things come out, where they should be finding out about them?
Yeah, just find me on Instagram or Twitter, Shaun Barger, just my name. Pretty easy to remember. I have my author page set up on Goodreads, so you can go follow me on there. I've got my Amazon author page. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main spots, but I'm on there pretty frequently whenever I should be writing and I'm doing what we talked about and being distracted by what's totally work. But find me on there. I'm working hard on Good Kid, Mage City, the sequel to Mage Against the Machine right now. I should be done that by end of June. Like, it's moving along real nice, and I am pretty stoked about this book. It's good. You guys are going to like it. And then after that, I'm working on this other book that's mostly done called Glitz, Neon Hollywood Wonderland, which is kind of just a darkly comedic, like supernatural Hollywood noir. So yeah, that one's pretty messed up and pretty fun too. So yeah, just stay tuned. Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome. Feel free to call me back anytime. This is great.
Well, Glitz sounds really cool. So whenever that does come out, I think we'll need to talk about that because that sounds really awesome.
Hell yeah, dude.
Again, Mage Against the Machine is in stores now from Saga Press. And Shaun, thank you so much for joining me on Fictitious.
All right. Thanks, brother. Bye.
The home for all things fictitious, including every episode and review, is fictitiouspodcast.com. You can find the show on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Fictitious Pod, and you can chat with me directly on Twitter where I'm at Adrian Buskey. Subscribe to Fictitious on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify so you don't miss all of my upcoming interviews and reviews, and be sure to check out the previous author interviews exploring the storytelling craft of science fiction and fantasy. I'm Adrian Buskey. Thanks for listening to Fictitious.